Hello, viewers. Well, some news today that the PlayStation 5 specs have been revealed. In an interview on Wired.com with Mark Cerny, he's revealed some of the elements that could be included in the new PS5. A first sort of concrete understanding of what we can expect in the new console. And so I thought, time to have a little chat. And so today I'm joined by Kevin.
Hello.
And Tom.
Hello.
Okay, guys. So Wired have had a bit of a look at the specs that we see here. There's quite a lot to go through, actually, in terms of various different elements. I'm going to let you kick off, Kevin, as to the aspect that sort of first. Well, I don't know. Should we talk about the aspects that stood out? I mean, obviously, I'm going to go through it then, have a ramble. But I think at the moment they're talking a bit about the new SSD sort of hard drive in the sense that it can load environments very quickly. I think when we're thinking about, a new console, we're thinking about better graphics, better audio. I mean, he says here that the audio is marginally better, but obviously with the extra performance and memory, they'll be able to do a lot more with audio, especially influence that in terms of the VR as well. Graphics-wise, obviously we're expecting the leap in performance. I mean, it's 2012 that they sort of finalized the PlayStation 4 around that time. All those years, it's an old piece of tech now. Imagine if you had a mobile phone from 2011, 2012. Yeah. It wouldn't be very good now, would it? And I think that shows how much developers have utterly rinsed the performance of, PS4 so far. Tom, actually, your thoughts. You've had to read through this article. What do you think of what Mark's saying here? And your initial impressions?
I think it's fairly impressive from what I've. Well, I can't. It's got the Ryzen CPU. I'm looking at a Ryzen for my PC currently, so I can vouch for the quality of those. I'm not sure how good this graphics card is, but I'm sure it's going to be a good one. It does say it's supporting ray tracing, which I'm a little bit worried about because the current the latest NVIDIA graphics cards that support them, it seems like it's not being supported too well. Like the game, it's almost too much for the cards to handle. So I'm wondering how much of that we'll actually see in the games if it's if it's going to have that much load on the graphics card. But
how real is ray tracing? Can they make fake ray tracing? Can they trick us with various techniques?
I'm sure they could. I mean, there's different levels of it even on these new cards. It goes all the way up to ultra down to low, and it's still an improvement. But yeah, I guess we'll just have to wait and see. It's all kind of a bit vague at the moment, isn't it? It sounds good on paper, but it's depending on how they utilize it in the actual machine, we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, it's funny. A developer said to me the other day, "It's all fake. It doesn't really exist. Ray tracing doesn't exist." He said, "It's all just graphical techniques and more performance, but it's not real ray tracing."
Yeah.
So who knows?
That's development, though, isn't it? It's all smoke and mirrors and tricks, and nobody reveals what the real sort of tricks are. And I guess if you can improve the overall experience in terms of visuals and audio, even if it's a hacked version of real-time ray tracing, then it's an improvement, I guess, and the technology can evolve from there. Maybe it's a generation too early for true console ray tracing, but time will tell, I guess.
It's using buzzwords. That's the thing.
Can I just tell you my best stat ever was in the early 90s, and it was the Atari Jaguar could move 512 million pixels per second. And everyone was like, "Wow, this is incredible! 64-bit technology compared to, say, the 16-bit Mega Drive."
Yeah.
And you later found out that stat was sort of true on a black and white television with only 2 tones of color, and that's where they got the stat from. And it's like, oh my goodness, what complete and utter nonsense.
It's all about the blast processing for me.
Blast processing.
Although, did you see there's an article about that, and apparently that was a real thing. They just never used it.
Yeah, Digital Foundry did a piece on it recently. Where they analysed that blast processing is a thing. The only problem is I watched the video on it and still didn't seem to fully understand what it was.
It was really confusing.
They showed really blocky, crappy pictures of graphics and said that this is blast processing. Looks a bit rubbish, actually. It's this blocky image that looks like it's 8-bit. Yeah, but if you can program it, you can do more colors on screen. can't really tell. Looks a
No.
bit rubbish. So it was an interesting technique, but it was a thing. So someone really knew their stuff back in 1988 when it came to blast processing and finalizing the Mega Drive. And well done to them as well. These days, they've got to be a bit more careful. I think you noted earlier, didn't you, Kevin, that they were using a downgraded dev kit or something?
Yeah, there's some sort of low-speed dev kit version that's doing the rounds, and I just wonder if this console generation will launch with like a sort of a standard console and then an enhanced one with 60 frames 4K or whatever, and improved frame rate perhaps, or give the player the choice, resolution over frame rate. It just seems like a good idea to, instead of having a mid-console refresh, launch with 2 consoles, and then if technology progresses so much, then perhaps you can have the additional mid generational console as well. It just seems like we're almost launching a console for X amount of years. It almost seems like a dated thing now, doesn't it? Because the way the mobile phones are improving year after year, they're going to overtake the consoles, and it seems a bit silly to me if they're just going to launch the one console at launch, 2020, 2021, whatever it will be. But I'd like to see 2 consoles, so the players that really want the ultimate next gen experience, be it in VR or not, can have that. But obviously you're going to pay through the nose for it. But it's an option there that I think many would go for. Particularly being a new console, I think everyone's hungry now for a new console. I think players will put down that money for the new console, and God knows we did with the PlayStation 2 all those years ago. So I think it's would be a good ploy for Sony to do, and I think there will be sufficient numbers to put that in place.
Well, you know what? When you look at PlayStation 1, that technology blew our mind back in 95, whatever it was, 94, 95. It blew our minds. Yep. By today's money, that was a £700 console.
Mm.
Now, what would be great is if you said, right, PlayStation 4 Pro is going to be 149 or 199 or whatever they can do it for in a year or two's time. And PlayStation 5 will be 599, 699. It's a more expensive console. So you can have a great PlayStation system at an entry level. You can have, 149 1080p headset because the tech will be 4 or 5 years old. And that's great. Or if you want to invest more, if you've gone out and bought a £700 Thrustmaster steering wheel and you want to have a £600, £700 console to play it on, you can do that. And it gives you the option. It's a bit like I say to people buying a mobile phone. Some people spend £100. Some people spend £800. But there's an option to buy a range of what suits you. Same with televisions. You can go and buy a television for £300. Or you can buy an OLED display that's amazing for £1,300. It's still a television. It does the same thing. But you get what you pay for in terms of experience. And if you want that better experience, save up and get the better experience. If you don't, you buy what you can afford. The console industry just doesn't allow that. It sort of channels you into, well, if we don't sell it at a budget price, no one will buy it. And I think that's an area where you've highlighted, Kevin, that if there is a standard model and a pro model at launch, that would be brilliant, because then you could, it's like I didn't buy a PlayStation 4 Pro. It didn't play 4K Blu-ray, which I thought was a big loss. And you need a reason to have it, don't you? It was marginally more powerful than a PS4, but it's taken quite a long time to really develop that performance. And for me, I just wouldn't have got enough from it. I wanted a console that was, Xbox One X, for example. That's more like it. It's got a lot more power, though they haven't used it. And I think that it works when you've got that option to choose between a SKU that gives you the experience that you're looking for. So
can I jump in here from a retail point of view? Because I was around for the launch of the PS4 and Xbox. I was working for Game at the time, and the main factor that made people buy the PlayStation over the Xbox was the price. So as soon as it went over it's weird, but this might sound weird. As soon as it goes over £400 now, people are like, I don't know. So if they launched without the Kinect, for example, they probably would have been fine. I think they would have done a lot better. Obviously, there was other factors like their their launch of the Xbox One was really, really terrible.
It was terrible. I mean, they packaged a Kinect none of us wanted, a
Yeah.
spy in your home.
It's all about sports, all that kind of stuff.
TV,
It was $429.99 for a console that was no more powerful than the PS4. In fact, it was less powerful.
It's quite a bit less powerful.
Quite less powerful. It looks horrendous. It had a big camera that you were paying a load of money for you didn't want. So overall, it was a terrible package. I think if you're selling a PS5 that has massive amount of power, that plays the 4K Blu-rays, that works with all your PS4 collection, upgrades them, that does everything already, it's not quite the same transition as it was, say, from PS3 to PS4.
No, sure. I think they might go in a different direction, though. Although one of them might go in a different direction. I think one of them will release a disc-free, disk drive-free console as an option instead of a more powerful one. Because I think the problem with launching a more powerful one at launch alongside a standard one is that tech is going to still age. Whereas if you release one now halfway through a gen, that is going to be more powerful, or at the very least it'll be cheaper, because that machine, like you said, would have to be £600 or £700. And people you're just getting into sort of like PC territory there at that point.
I would say they can do both, can't they? They can have two at launch and one mid-gen. I think the way it's working now is there's going to be an expectation for a mid-gen upgrade, because we've seen it now of Xbox. It's going to become the norm, and perhaps even more consoles will come to market. So for me, it makes sense to do two at launch and then perhaps a mid upgrade, if indeed the console generation is going to be as long as what we've seen in recent years. I mean, they might shorten that. Who knows? We might see the next gen, within 4 or 5 years. The way that the technology is evolving, I guess.
I think this might be the last console generation.
Really, already? You think so?
This the next one, I think, because everything's going digital now, isn't it? As much as I don't want it to go digital, because I'm very much holding on to my physical, but who knows?
People my feeling is that the PlayStation 4 and Xbox were underwhelming, very poor, frankly. I was disappointed with the specs on both systems at launch, and I felt that, let's put out a system that's £400 that we know will be dated in a year or two. It's for me a very frustrating way to know that there's going to be a new console in 2 years, and I'm not the sort of person to just upgrade every 2 years. I've got a console, that's it. It's a big investment. When you're spending £450 on a new console, it might not be 700, it might not be 600, but it's still a big investment. When you're releasing a new one every 2 years or something like that, it's going to change the landscape a bit. I felt that the Pro was what the PS4 really should have been from the off in terms of performance. I felt that and in fact, a good example was when I went to Gamescom to play Forza Motorsport 5 at the time, and the development version was miles better than the final console, because they had clearly overestimated how powerful that console was going to be. So I think that in terms of controlling the power, you're right, they might underpower it, make more money on the console, because classically years ago they didn't make anything on consoles, and then just release a new one in a couple of years. It'd be a shame to do that, because I would like to see console that really steps it forward and gives developers a proper amount of room. But if they release it for $399, and that's why I feel that we've got a PlayStation 4 Pro on the market, sell it at $199, $149. You've got really good entry level PS4 market, and you've got time to transition. I think it would also be interesting to see how PS4 games are upgraded on this new hardware. They talked a bit about Spider-Man. Yeah,
I was gonna say that's the next point, isn't it? The whole backwards compatible stuff. Because they've only announced PS4 for now. I think this is me hoping rather than expecting, but I'm hoping they're going to announce 1, 2, and 3 at some kind of conference somewhere, because they'll save those, because that'll be a big talking point, won't it? But yeah, it's good to see that it's backwards compatible with PS4 games. I think that should be a given now, though. Like, all consoles should be backwards compatible.
Xbox, that was the biggest, that was a jaw-dropping moment, wasn't it, at E3, when Xbox announced the backwards compatibility. Wow, so Sony has to at least equal Xbox now, including the sort of mid console generation upgrade. So these are two things that Sony has to do. now. And you know, we talk about loading times earlier on. I mean, we thought loading times would be a thing of the past, didn't we? Years and years ago when we had these new consoles, and
it's worse.
It's worse. Yeah. So hopefully we get some really sort of beefy solid state drives now that we need that can sort of instantaneously load, or near as instantaneously load our games, because it is an ongoing frustration over the years that like you say, it's just gotten worse, isn't it?
I think they gave I haven't got it in front of me here, but I think they gave an example, didn't they, for Spider-Man, where on PS4 the load time was like 15 seconds, and on the PS5 it was 0.8 seconds.
Yeah, which bodes very well for backwards compatibility, doesn't it? Play your games the way they should be experienced, really.
Yeah,
that'll be really interesting. I look forward to seeing what they can do with backward compatibility, because it's great that you've got that whole collection of games.
And perhaps even more exciting is the fact that the PSVR is going to be backwards compatible as well. That's an interesting development, I thought.
Yeah, I think that, you know, it's great because you've got 4 million VR headsets out there already. So when you make a VR game, and if just imagine a Gran Turismo Sport, good example. At the moment, you've got time trial mode. It's the only thing you can have. Just imagine if you can have GT Sport full race mode with maximum detail, anti-aliasing, everything at max in VR with weather. You know, they can do all that, and suddenly you've got an incredible entry-level VR experience. And then after 3 or 4 years, they release a super-powered 2 to 4K VR headset, and suddenly, boom, everybody's going to be on it. I think also esports is going to use a lot more VR. I think esports racing will be more and more using VR in the future. So
it presents an issue, doesn't it? Because if you have these esports players with essentially helmets on, how do you sort of get their personalities across during the racing action?
Well, I think, you know, it's a bit like a real motor racing, isn't it, to an extent? I mean, they've got helmets on when they're actually in the race. So I think what you'll need to do...
We know the F1 drivers. We don't know our esports drivers very well.
Well, no, and that's really down to the scale of the tournament, getting to know them, interviewing them before they go into the race, following them throughout the year. And it's something I've mentioned a lot, is that you have an esport tournament in October, November on F1, and the rest of the year, the players are left to their own devices. There's no real media presence.
If we don't care for the drivers, it's not going to entice us to view it, really. Is it not? No. We need to cheer for our favourite. That's what brings us into motorsport. We're cheering on our favourite drivers. We're booing our less favoured drivers as well. You know, so sometimes we watch for drivers to fail at times. You know, so it gets sort of bums on seats, doesn't it? Viewing figures up. So we really
it does
have attachment to these esport drivers, because they're extremely well. You know, they're extremely talented drivers for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, the VR, I don't think VR will take away from that. In fact, if anything, I think it will bring something to it, because just imagine, you know, F1 2025 esports, you're going to have probably full monocoques there. You're going to have guys coming out, putting on their helmets, jumping into a car, and they're going to be in a full F1 VR setup there, probably painted with the teams on and everything. It's going to be a whole different world.
One problem there, though, potentially. This is from an outsider's point of view. Is that not another barrier to entry? Having like VR as a, not necessarily a must, but if you're doing it on screen with VR at least, but you're practicing at home without it, does that not give some kind of advantage?
Well, that's a good question. Do you know what? There are 20 guys that drive Formula One cars, and there's 1 billion people who watch them. The value is in the audience. It's not in the drivers, believe it or not. If you enter into an esport, chances are there's the same 100 guys that are going to be topping every tournament from now to the end of time, the aliens. So as much as you feel like you're getting somewhere, the barrier to entry is going to be more expensive. I mean, right now, you need a good steering wheel.
Yeah.
You know, £500 on a steering wheel, at least. Some of these guys, then you've got a rig. So you're going to need to spend £500 on a rig. So you're spending a lot of money now. Plus you've got your PlayStation, that's 400 odd pounds, plus your new VR headset. You know, so once you get everything kitted out, it's everything is expensive now. Look at streaming, goodness. So
I think it's interesting because I think it's specifically a racing game problem, because you look at like the fighting game championships now, and they're actually getting much bigger over time, because a lot more people are accepting of using controllers now. Like you don't have to have an arcade stick, where like, everyone would like frown upon you if you didn't have an arcade stick before. And I wonder maybe if that's one of the reasons why you don't see like racing esports as big as, say, like fighting game esports.
No, I think fighting games has been around for 30 years. Racing gaming in its current form has been around for 10 years, maybe. It's not, we've not really had anything. I mean, F1 esports started 2 years ago. You know, Street Fighter started 25 years ago, whatever. So
it's a different market, though, isn't it? I mean,
it is. It will grow rapidly. It will develop its stars once the money rolls in and sponsors get on board. I mean, you know, if you take Brendan Lee, who won the F1, you know, he's a name now. Everyone knows him in racing gaming terms. And I think, you know, once they grow that, it will develop. And you'll see it the same for rally. I mean, we'll talk about F1 there, but you're talking about the same for rally games and everything in their various countries. I mean, rally's not as big in the UK as it is, say, in Germany. In Germany, the star of WRC Rally esports will be huge, but it's taken a long time. I mean, these esports, you know, they've been going in the rest of the world for years, and you know, they do a lot of RTS games in, you know, Korea and stuff like that, South Korea. So that have been huge, and you used to watch them years ago and wonder why are the audience so interested. But they're not invested so much in the game so much as they are in the players. But it's not so much. I mean, for example, I've watched Tetris World Finals sometimes, and I'm just amazed at the Tetris players. I mean, they're literally like alien dudes on another level. I mean, the speed at which their minds work just blows my mind. And to an extent, it's so fast, you're not really looking at the players' faces anyway. I mean, you get the odd emotional, but I think with VR, there won't just be racing games. There'll be flight games and action games, and it will change a whole different genre. I think it's going to be about, as I say, when you're watching sport, you know, like motorsport in particular, they're always wearing helmets anyway. So you're watching the cars going round. You're not watching the player's face, but you develop an understanding of when a driver's happy or sad. But we're going a bit off topic here. The point is that you can have an entry level in terms of a PlayStation VR 1080p, and if that's 199 or 149, you've got an entry level into that. So if you want to get into esports and it goes VR, that's a good way into it. And I think that it gets people into VR because VR is amazing. But the thing holding it back is the limitations in technology, the amount of processing required, and of course the resolution, which is currently very poor.
And on the subject of that, I mean, it'd be nice to play Drive Club VR in a higher resolution, wouldn't it, on the next gen console, just to get the true sort of experience that, you know.
If only, if only Sony hadn't wasted it off. Yeah. If Sony hadn't binned Evolution Studios, imagine MotorStorm 4, you know, on launching PlayStation 5 with VR. I mean, the mind can only wonder now what that would have been like. But alas, it is what it is. So, yeah, I think VR, interesting. They talk a bit about 8K, and I think when they talk about 8K, what does that mean? Well, I don't think you're going to see 8K gaming. No. I think what you're likely to see is 8K menus, perhaps some old games, you know, like vector games or whatever in 8K, some retro stuff.
2D stuff, yeah.
Yep, 2D stuff. You'll have 8K compatibility. It might mean that if we did move to a 4K headset, that's 4K per eye, then it has a compatibility with a 4K headset. That's also interesting in the world of VR as well. So, yeah, I think in terms of VR, I think it's exciting that they're still backing it. As I say, one of my favorite experiences on PSVR was the Star Wars demo. And it was a real shame that they didn't produce a Star Wars game.
That's the only thing I've tried so far on VR, and it was amazing.
It's amazing. I love that demo, but there's only so much you can do on it. I played it over and over and over and over again. Eventually, I just needed more. I spoke to developers. They were working on more, and then it just never got released, basically. So, you know, it was a real shame. But they had some big plans for it in the Star Wars Battlefront 2, it seems, and then it all just kind of got canned for some reason. So it's a shame because they actually said that they made that Star Wars demo in a very short space of time. So it's a real shame that it didn't actually.
I think that's a separate problem, though, isn't it? Like with VR games specifically, that you're like the development costs aren't necessarily cheaper. In some cases, they might be more expensive, I would imagine. And you're only catering for, well, at this point, what, 4 million? Did you say?
Yeah,
4 million people. Where there's 80 million PlayStation 4s. So it's like, do you make a VR game, or do you make a game that's, you know, going to be available to everyone?
Well, I think you look at it like this. PSVR was poorly marketed and has hardly any decent games. It's not only that, but if, again, take a look at Gran Turismo, you can only do a time trial with one car on track. But if you had an opportunity to run proper racing, proper cars, I'd probably be on VR all the time. You know, it's just the fact that they need to improve the way it works, you know, and I think if they can do that and they can make it more available, then it's definitely worth going for.
Carrying on with the 8K support, I think you're totally right there. I think that, do you reckon they'll do 8K Blu-ray? I don't know if that's even a thing at the moment.
No, it's not a thing. And you know what? Just a word on Blu-ray for a second. You know, I know someone who says I use. I know a couple of people have said to me, I use my PS4 as a Blu-ray player, and I wanted a 4K Blu-ray player, so I bought an Xbox One X. It's in my living room purely to play 4K Blu-rays these days. I don't play it so much, and it's just a shame that the PS4 Pro doesn't play 4K Blu-rays. But I'll say this: 3D was really came of age on a 4K television. If you watched a 3D film on a 4K OLED TV, it was amazing. A 1080p 4K film looks way sharper than a 4K film. Isn't that strange? And unfortunately, 4K doesn't do 3D, so they've removed the whole feature.
I've got to admit, though, 3D for me, as far as I haven't actually tried 3D on a home TV, but 3D at the cinema as a glasses wearer is an absolute nightmare.
Well, it's funny you say that. The 3D on the OLED TVs, 4K OLED TVs, is better than the cinema. It's absolutely amazing. I mean, the final top of the range LG in 2016 or whatever, when I watched a few 3D movies on it, I was like, wow, I was floored by it. It improved so much since. I mean, I went to a display in 2009 when Avatar was released and was like, that's nice. I like the displays. I went to EGX 2011, 2010 when they had PlayStation 5, Gran Turismo 5, and they had it on the stand running in 3D, and it was horrible. I didn't like playing racing games in 3D. I thought it was awful. I thought the only time that 3D sort of worked is when you had a 3D HUD or something. But in films, on a 4K TV, it made a massive difference. And I perhaps one day they'll be able to produce a 4K 3D, and maybe that will bring it back again. But I can't see it happening anytime soon.
I think they've pinned it, haven't they? It's just gone now.
For the moment, sadly. It's one of those things. But it's a shame. They got rid of it just as the technology was getting good. But unfortunately, only a small percentage of people out there have tried it on a really top 4K television. And that's the real shame about it. By the time it got good, people had already made their mind up that it was rubbish. And that was it, really. I've got a 3D 1080p TV, but no glasses, because unfortunately it was an active. So the glasses cost £55 each. And I said, no. so
£1,000 is fine, £55 too much.
No, you know, but you got to buy like 4 of them.
Yeah,
it's like £220 for 4 pairs of glasses. I'm like, I'm not paying that. You know, otherwise you're just sitting there and everybody else pops around to watch a film, and it's like everyone has to watch 3D with no glasses. That's just not going to happen, is it?
Poverty tax.
Lovely, exactly. So there we go. So 8K, I think it's a buzzword. It's like the Jaguar thing. It can do it, yeah, but how much can it actually display on screen on menus and small games and compatibility? And we'll see perhaps when they release the PS5 Pro.
So let's wait until we see 4K 60 first. That's I think that's the benchmark.
That's the next benchmark, which will look perfectly fine for most of us for the next 10 years.
Perfectly fine. I think it's going to look amazing.
Yes, for the next 10 years. And even so, I still feel that the PS5 is a step towards making games look really amazing. It's not going to be everything. It's another step. I still think there's a lot in terms of processing that developers and they're going to use in terms of the memory. And I feel that, as I say, every time you make a step, they introduce more things to make it work. So, yeah, I think that covers a lot of it. I think the next thing really is, was there anything else actually that stood out to you guys in terms of this article that you thought, oh, that seems interesting?
I think we've got nearly everything.
Yeah.
The one thing that was nice to see was that this is still going to use physical media, they've said.
Yeah.
So that
Which is
confirms,
important.
obviously, you know, we're not going fully digital yet. But like I said, I've got a funny feeling that the next gen after this will be one of them is going to push for digital only. Because do you keep track of the charts every week, like as far as how games are doing?
Sometimes.
Well, I think these numbers are inflated anyway, aren't they? Because they're giving away free games every month, and they're all digital. I'm sure they've included those into the digital figures. So
They don't.
They don't.
There's no digital figures. That's the problem. And at the moment,
no, but as every so often you come across X amount of percentage of sales are digital.
I see what you mean. Yeah,
those are the ones I feel are inflated by the free games. You know.
Yeah, I mean, until we see until Chart Track or whoever it is that tracks it actually takes into consideration digital games, which I don't know if they can. I don't know if there's any way to track it. Then all we're going to see is like it just seems to be like a doomsday for physical media. Like 30% down every year. And
I don't believe those figures quite yet, but yeah, I know what you're saying. It's almost like they're pushing for digital.
Well, they are, yeah.
Yeah, like even when it's perhaps not as dominant as maybe they're trying to make out it is. You know,
digital's not for me, but I don't not want to have it. I just want the choice of
choice
or because the problem I find with digital is like, especially, did you guys play Red Dead? Have you played Red Dead 2 yet? On PlayStation or Xbox?
I haven't yet. No.
That
I mean,
game,
I've watched people playing it, but I haven't played it myself.
It's 110 gig on Xbox One X.
Yeah.
Can you imagine how long that's going to take to download on like the average person's internet? That's like 2 days.
Yeah.
I don't want to wait.
No, internet is not there yet, is it? I mean, I was saying that about the whole Stadia thing. Yeah, it's that we're not there yet in terms of infrastructure, and we're not going to be there for another 15 years. I mean, it's that you know, there's going to be at least another 15 years before we get the kind of uploads and download speeds we need to run that level of data. And it's the same with hard drives. It's a massive problem, isn't it? I mean, you're going to need like a 4 terabyte hard drive.
Oh, at least
minimum.
I mean, I have right now. I've got a 4 terabyte on my PS4, and I've got a 5 on my Xbox One.
Yeah,
and you know, large chunks are being taken up all the time. So, but you need an SSD, massive capacity hard drive, don't you, for these new gen consoles?
And they're so expensive.
Bloody expensive. Yeah.
That's going to be an issue. So let's talk a bit about launch window then. They're saying all this now. So developers, where are we? We're April 2019. They're giving the indication a lot of their close developers have already got dev kits. They could have gone out a week ago, a month ago, 6 months ago, for all we know. And they've said that it's definitely not coming this year, which we all knew anyway.
Yeah.
So I think we're looking at 2020, because if you think that developers will have had the consoles for a certain amount of time, Sony will have had it probably about 3 to 6 months longer than anyone else anyway, because they'll always get their own first party to get everything first and the full performance specs, plus all the software will be developed and their technology they'll be working on. So we could look at a Christmas 2020 launch, or a sort of a spring 2021. But I do feel that in the way the conversation is, once you put out there that a new console is coming, the wait feels excruciating.
Yeah.
And I feel that now they've mentioned this now. Why have they mentioned it, actually? Why have they mentioned it, do you think?
Well, I mean, the rumored today, I don't know if it's actually been done or not, but supposedly Microsoft are going to be revealing the diskless Xbox One S, all digital version. So it's almost like a knee-jerk reaction to that, I feel.
I think they're just trying to gauge a reaction, honestly. I think they're just going to put this out there, see what people, how they react to it, and then maybe chop and change some bits depending on how we react.
Is it it could be a reaction. It could be they might be aware that Microsoft are going to make a statement and they want to just put something out there to destabilize, because of course they're not going to be at E3. It's interesting why they felt the need to mention it. I do find it
a bit like chess going on now, isn't it?
There's a bit of destabilizing, in terms of Microsoft looking at that and thinking, oh, we don't have that, maybe we should put that in there, or maybe we should change our strategy and so on. So going to be interesting as to
But
what
I guess
Sony go
all the
with.
strategies are in place now. They can't change it now, you know, because it takes a long time, the manufacturing process, doesn't it? You have to lock in these details quite early, a year or two or whatever, you know. So it's just, I guess they have to go with what they've got now. We just don't know what each has, you know. So who's is bigger than the others? This is the whole the whole debate, isn't it? Show me yours and I show you yours. You show me mine. But you know, who knows? I mean, Xbox certainly dropped the ball, didn't they, last time out? So they're looking. I've got faith in Xbox after the Xbox One X. You know, they've proven that they can put something out there at a reasonable price that's really powerful. So you know, it has to be X amount more performance than the Xbox One X now, doesn't it? It has to be more powerful. So we're looking at God knows how many teraflops.
I don't think the power is going to be the problem with their next machine. I think they're going to nail it as far as power goes. I think it'll probably be more powerful than the PS5. I don't think they'll underestimate them again, will they?
No,
but
no, they're on that.
They need games.
Oh, badly. They badly need games.
They need games.
Badly. And what's made it even worse is the fact that they've done this Xbox Play or anywhere where you can play it on the PC. And so you think to yourself,
doesn't it?
Why bother playing my games on the Xbox when I can just play them on the PC? I don't even need an Xbox now. And that's the problem with the Xbox. You know, it's almost redundant most of the time. I barely use the Xbox One X these days.
I use mine for multi-platform stuff because it's still the best performer.
That's right.
Multi-platform stuff. But then I play all the exclusives on PlayStation.
That's right. That's right. And it's handy when you do have one console. I mean, for example, say the Xbox, whatever it is more powerful than a PS5. It will have to be quite a bit more powerful to see any kind of discernible difference. So if the PS5 is like 12 teraflops, you know, and we're talking in flops terms now, if we go floppy and we talk about Xbox being 13 teraflops, that's not enough flop to really make a difference. It's going to mean a bit more shiny bits here and there, a bit more anti-aliasing. You're not going to notice that extra blades of grass. It isn't going to make much difference. Do you know what I mean? That's it. That's all there is to it.
It's just all I want is a stable frame rate.
Stable frame rate.
I want a stable frame rate, and I want, like, at least, you know, for the next gen consoles, I want 4K.
4K 60. We all want 4K 60.
Yeah, I want good VR experiences. I don't want to see many jaggy lines, and I want to see them really push that end of the spectrum. But yeah, like you say, the Xbox has to be much more superior than the PS5 because it doesn't have the games there. You have to, you know, really sort of appeal to the performance, I guess, way of things. But I don't know. They used to have the exclusives, didn't they? Xbox with the 360, weren't them games amazing? They had so many franchises, and it's sort of largely gone away now, isn't it? So it's been very disappointing to be an Xbox fan this generation.
They take turns, don't they? Like the 360 was, well, it was dominating, but I think they balanced it out towards the end.
Games were superior, weren't they, on the Xbox 360?
Yeah, I think towards the end we were getting a bit more out of the PS3, but it took a long time. And now they dropped the ball on this one. PS4 is I think double, isn't it? I think it's 2 to 1. PlayStation over Xboxes.
Yeah.
Switch is nearly caught up with the Xbox, but I think it's still the thing is, like, they always talk about numbers, don't they? Like, oh, you know, so and so is doing so well and these guys are not doing so well. I think 40 million consoles is still good enough. I think they're doing all right on that. I don't think they're crying with some dollar bills there.
I mean, I think they've done you know what, I think Microsoft dropped the ball badly this generation. I think they should have taken over from Sony. You know, when the Xbox One was announced, the anticipation for Xbox One was off the chart. You know, I love the Xbox 360 and I just did not like the Xbox One. I mean, a lot of people didn't, but, you know, not only was it underpowered, but I don't like the menus on the Xbox One X. I think they're horrible. I think the look of the Xbox One X, look at it, it's still a brick. It's a square, basic, dull box. It has no personality to it. It's got a stupid name, Xbox One. I mean, who thought about that name anyway? Did they sit there and think about it?
It was terrible.
Oh yeah, I played Project Gotham on the Xbox One. No, not that Xbox One, the Xbox One. You know, the first Xbox that came out 10 years ago. I mean, how many times have we all had that conversation?
I just like the project names. You know, they always come with like good project names.
Yeah.
Oh,
Like
is it?
Scorpio. I mean, the Xbox One wasn't. No, it was. It wasn't Xbox One X originally. Durango or something, which was terrible.
There's rumored ones as well. Maverick, I think it is, an Anaconda.
Yeah.
So some real sort of
Good
interesting
names. Good names. You know, I like names for I quite like names for consoles.
But the one is the all-in-one entertainment box, isn't it? That was the original.
Yeah,
vision.
that was it. Yeah.
TV.
Oh God, sports.
And then PlayStation come along and it's all about the games. You know, this is all we ever wanted. You know, was about the games. So
yeah.
Wow. And do you remember the sharing, the disc sharing?
Oh, that was the best. That was so good.
The power of the cloud. The power of the cloud will enable us to do unlimited gameplay graphics and power and performance.
You guys played Crackdown 3 yet?
No.
It's not good. It's really not good.
I remember saying to a developer, what's this power of the cloud business all about? It just sounds like rubbish to me. And it really was. I mean, they really didn't know what they were talking. I mean, there's little things, but it was just, you know, I mean, they were making out that it completely changed the graphics and experience. And, it was just a buzzword, as was Connect. I mean, Connect was, let's just force it on people, make people take Connect. And you think, you know, you'd be better off forcing people with VR headsets than you would be with Connect. And I just felt Connect from the moment I used it. Obviously, if anyone saw a video on it, I was too tall to use it anyway. And I did do a couple of videos. So I did one in Star Wars, didn't I? Where it just couldn't see me basically. And it kept combining me with a door. So I was just a door-sized man, basically. So yeah, I did Star Wars Racer with it, and you had to sort of hold your arms out in front of you and steer as if that was the engines in the and move your arms backwards and forwards and stuff. And your arms got so tired racing around. But I just, there was a lot of it was, you know, the dancing stuff, the launch stuff was fun, but it was so limited. It was rubbish. So that's Connect. But yeah, we'll see next gen. There's bound to be a good old gimmick they're going to need.
Yeah.
A buzzword. So on this, the buzzword for Sony is hard drive.
No gimmicks. Just make it good. Just no
gimmicks. Just fast hard drive. That's all you needed.
Controller, anything like that.
4K 60, and that's it. That's good enough for me.
4K 60, improved VR.
Yeah.
Better load times.
Better load times.
Backwards compatibility.
We are humble. We want very simple things.
We're simple. We're simple, aren't we?
Yeah. Good controller.
Frame rate.
Simple man. Yeah, exactly. And that's all I need. The basic stuff that works. I think, you know, it's funny, but when we're on here talking about games and reviewing them, which we've got another one to talk about in a bit, but we always sound like we're moaning quite a lot of the time, and we're not. We just want stability, a solid game that functions well, frame rate works, everything works.
Like it did in the arcades.
Like it did in the arcades. And I think that, you know, so much do we have substandard frame rates and developers that don't get it. And I think when we have PS5 and Xbox 2, we'll be able to look at it and say 60 frames per second is now eminently achievable. There is no excuse on the next gen for substandard frame rates.
There's going to be developers that will push graphics.
Sure. Well, no, and you know,
if Gen Drive Club, won't you? 30 frames.
But if they do, then you're going to look at that and you're going to say, do you know what, that game looks incredible. But if someone's got a game that doesn't look great and it still runs at 30, so number off the score.
Problem is graphics sell, don't they? So,
yep, they really do.
They do, but I think that with the balance you have, if you take a look at a good example, Monster Energy Supercross 2 on the PC looked amazing at 60 frames per second on the PC. Looked great.
Yeah.
Looked dull and flat on the PlayStation. The lighting wasn't as vibrant, the graphics weren't as good, but on the PC it was perfectly acceptable. That can run at 60 frames. If they say, oh, we can do ray tracing shadow effects and we can keep the frame rate at 30 frames, that's just a bad decision. That to me is a no-go. You've got to work with what you've got. And I can see this ray tracing gimmick being encoded in. It's going to use tons of power and performance to get the ray tracing feature working. And it's not going to be nearly as good as everyone's hoping. You know,
I like the way the Xbox One has adopted the system where you give player choice. Do you want frame rate? Do you want resolution?
I like that.
And I like that a lot, because that gives you, you know, both ends of the spectrum. You can choose what is your preference. Okay, I'll have this today. Maybe tomorrow I'll try this, and then I'll weigh up. Do I prefer frame rate over resolution? It's almost like you're educating people as well on what they want. So with these new consoles, I don't see why they can't have that in place, because that would keep everyone happy, wouldn't it?
Yes, it keeps me happy. That's what's important. You know, I mean, at the end of the day, you know, frame rate, resolution's all well and good, but you know, and we've got 4K, we've got the power, we've got performance now, we've got some teraflops. We don't know how many flops it's going to be, but hopefully it's going to be enough to, you know, get us there. What do we want? How many flops do we want? We want at least 15 flops, but I don't think we're going to get that.
I think, or as important as resolution, HDR.
HDR adds a lot.
It's so nice. It looks. It makes the game look so much nicer when you've got good HDR.
It's done well, I'd say. Yeah, sometimes it's not utilized very well by certain games, but when it works, yeah, it certainly does elevate the whole. I mean, infamous Second Son with HDR looks.
I've not actually seen that actually.
Yeah, I mean, this game is many years old, and you know, it looks amazing to this day. This game. This is what we were talking about earlier with the PlayStation, you know, reaching almost a limit, or you know, close to the ceiling very early on in the generation, and infamous Second Son is actually a good example of that. But yeah, when it's done well, it can look absolutely fantastic, and that's technology that will only get better. You know, TVs will improve in this area, and of course the way the games utilize that technology as well. So it's certainly one very exciting area, isn't it? I don't know whether we can have it in VR so much, but we'll have to wait and see how technology.
Certainly a new generation. I mean, with new tech, new performance. I spoke about this in the last gen, and you know, it would be, if they do try and go for a high resolution headset, it would be amazing if the headset could contain a second CPU in the headset, so that it could power one eye. So you had onboard CPU powering one eye and a CPU with the headset powering the other. And then you could have a big step forward in graphics. The only problem with that is I see it's like a £700 VR headset, and that's going to be a real problem for 4K VR, isn't it? I mean,
only one very small portion of the eye is viewing anything in you know, really high detail at any one point, because our eyes blur out the visuals around this central focal point. So I'm sure they can trick your eye into having that effect in VR, where the very bit you're looking at will be in very high resolution, whereas everything around it could be blurred. And if they can mimic the eye in that sense, you wouldn't actually see that blurring going on.
That's right. So we see in 16K per eye. That's what we actually see.
Really?
We see around 2% of our 100% vision, just 2% in detail.
At any one time. In
so you only need to render 2% in full detail. The rest can be slightly out of focus. I did have a stat given to me once in a conference, and that is that obviously we have 6 teraflops Xbox One X. Based on teraflops of data, you would need 754 teraflops to power the human eye as it is.
Aren't we amazing?
So they do feel
25s or something, aren't we?
Well, exactly. They do feel that in the next sort of 20 years, we will make a radical improvements in our flops up to about 30s and 40s, which will make a radical difference. But it shows how far we are from being able to render exactly what the eye sees. So eye tracking is the next tech.
It's getting more expensive, Alan.
Well, no, not necessarily. Well, actually, it is quite expensive in the sense that you would have a 8K per eye screen, maybe, or 16K per eye screen, but you'd only render 2K of that. So it would render the pixels you're actually looking at. The problem is that if you imagine a pupil being big for a second, and what part of the pupil is the eye actually viewing out of? What part of that black hole does the actual vision look at? How do we identify that? And what you need is a laser inside the VR headset that shoots into your eye, that works out exactly what you're looking at and focuses that for you, and it moves as fast as your eye does.
You could get it to do a corrective laser eye surgery as well at the same time.
Well, I'll tell you, it's certainly, who knows what it can do in the future once they actually understand how an eye works. It's still years away. I mean, we're talking like 40, 50 years away before they work that out, but it'll be in time for me to get old, and then that'll open up all kinds of possibilities for VR, which would be brilliant. So I look forward to that. And I think that's about it really on VR. I think that's good chat on VR, guys. I think PlayStation 5 has lots of potential. There's lots of room for Sony to drop the ball and do a bad job, no doubt, but I don't think they will. I think they've got good first parties. Mark seems to know what he's doing. He's got his head screwed on his shoulders, it seems. He knows what developers want. He understands that. And I think he gets what gamers want as well. And I think that's a good thing. And then there's people like us to have a good old moan at developers if they don't do it right. I think the next thing really is going to be, what's the transitional process for developers between PS4 and PS5? I've spoken to developers and they say actually the transition from PS3 to PS4 was horrendous. However, the transition to PS4 to 5 should be quite straightforward. Literally upgrading. So you could release a PS5 game and then just like you would with lowering the specs on a PC game, you could make the PS4 conversion. Simple as that. You know, and literally scale it.
X enhanced, I guess. It's using the same x86 architecture, isn't it? So it's just, you just unlock the potential. You know, a lot of these games, like Gran Turismo Sport, has higher polygon models apparently that they've had to downgrade to put into sport. So it's future proof. Some of the games are future proof. So it's just a matter of maybe ticking a few boxes or whatever, an extra line of code, unlock that full resolution assets, and away you go.
I think the main difference is that the last gen of consoles was kind of like the last gen of like consoles being consoles. Now they're just PCs.
Yeah, PlayStation 2 and 3 had very unusual architecture and chipsets and whatnot. So yeah, it's got getting rid of that sort of voodoo, isn't it? That was very hard to sort of decipher and like you say, more PC like now, which people can understand. And the problem with that though is they peak very early in the generation, don't they? So I guess you don't have that sort of improvement. If you look back at the old PlayStation 3 games versus the ones later in the generation, there was a massive difference. Not so much with this generation, and I expect not so much with the next either will happen. So you sort of lose that wow factor once you get maybe 2 or 3 years into the generation, you know?
I think that's a different problem though. I think that's just the graphical upgrades per gen is not as big as it used to be.
Oh no, I'm saying throughout the actual generation. If you look at like an early PlayStation 3 game versus a late one, you have that progression of people understanding the technology. Whereas nowadays, because they're more like PCs, they'll hit the ceiling much earlier in the generation. So you won't necessarily get a massive gap visually between, you know, like an early PS4 versus a late PS4 game. So you sort of lose that bit of magic in a way, you know. But it's good initially. But yeah, I think because of that, actually, I think that because you lose that wow factor throughout a generation, people want a sort of shorter lifespan for a console. That's why we have the mid-generation upgrade, because you don't have that sort of constant improvement throughout the generation. You just hit the peak pretty early on. People get bored. They want something more powerful, and then in comes Xbox One X.
It'd be interesting to see. I think that developers do seem to be able to, they can move their tech across. And I'm not talking about first party, you know, but independent developers. They don't get, not just independent, it's actually mid-sized developers. They don't get any support from you know, Sony or Microsoft, or say any support, very low levels of support. They have to design all their in-house tech. So I think if their in-house tech that they've been developing for the last 4 or 5 years moves swiftly across to PlayStation 5, then you could see some mid-sized developers really gaining in terms of performance of what they can achieve on compared to the bigger companies. Obviously, Sony will always hire the best people, and Microsoft will hire the best people, and they can afford the best wages and all the rest of it. But it'd be certainly interesting to see if they can close up. It's just the scale of projects. You know, we look at something like Red Dead, they could develop it over 5, 6 years. You know, Rockstar's just rolling in dough. So to them, it doesn't really matter how long it takes, does it? So just imagine what you know games are going to look like Red Dead on with this new hard drive and everything, you know, on the new system. It could be incredible.
I'm all excited now, Alan. You get me all excited.
See, there you go. There you go. You know, I think, you know, when you look at all these games, you know, Uncharted and you know, God of War, what that could be, you know, just with the future. But I also like cyber. What's it?
Cyberpunk
2077. Is it? Yep.
Can't wait for that. That's gonna be game of generation for me, I think.
Well, that on that will probably, at this point, one would expect a PS5 compatible mode.
Yeah.
They're talking about Death Stranding coming out on PS5, the walking simulator, as I saw it as when they were showing the early version. Can you imagine how amazing they're going to be? You know, even in VR, I'd love to play that in VR.
I was about to say that. I mean, these sort of PlayStation 4 games of recent years, why not make VR versions of those? Imagine Cyberpunk in VR for next generation, for example. That'd be incredible.
That'd be amazing. Just living in that world, just sitting in your apartment, just there. Just there.
That power unlocks everything, even for the mid-tier, even indie developers. You know, a lot of these developers are limited by the power. Their imagination is, you know, being limited by the lack of power. So when you have this, suddenly unlocks all this potential. They can put in all these elements that you know, it's not a lack of talent or a lack of passion or anything like that. It's often a lack of power to realize, you know, these true visions of their games. So it'd be interesting to see these sort of mid-tier developers, how much they can really increase in terms of, you know, their experience of the games with this increased power. It's going to be incredible, isn't it?
Well, lots of potential there, and I think that just about covers it, chaps, for today's chat on PS5. Certainly, we're looking forward to it, and at least these stats have finally given us something to talk about. But we'll have to wait and see how that turns out in gaming. Obviously, I don't think you're going to see anything more this year other than tech speak, and then at some point next year, no doubt, Sony will show off the console and the proposed new titles and give us a real example at some point of what the technical performance could be. They may even show that towards the end of this year in terms of tech demos and stuff like that. It should be impressive. But that's it from me for now. I hope you've enjoyed the chat today, viewers, and from Kevin and Tom as well. And we'll be no doubt back later in the year to talk more about PS5 and Xbox, whatever, as they get released in the months to come. But that's it from us for now. As ever, more soon.